Welcome to Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. And tonight, where the powerful meet their match. This morning, Harlem Congressman Charlie Rangel was forced to step down as chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. Temporarily, he says. This after allegations of corporate-funded trips to the Caribbean, unreported income from a villa in the DR, and that quartet of rent-stabilized apartments. Here's the second fall from grace. New York State's police superintendent, Harry Corbett. He announced his resignation after admitting his troopers meddled in the domestic abuse case that forced Governor Patterson to abandon his re-election campaign. Number 3 is a fall apparently in progress. The governor himself is in danger of having to resign. First, a key figure in that abuse case reportedly told investigators that Patterson was indeed involved in quieting the woman who was trying to get court protection from Patterson's aide, the alleged abuser. Other reason? Sounds trivial compared to violence against women, but World Series tickets. Late today, the state's Commission on Public Integrity accused the governor of taking the tickets free from the Yankees, a no-no, then later backdating a check when the press got wind. Prosecutors will investigate. And the fourth political heavyweight in the news is Mort Zuckerman, the real estate tycoon and Daily News owner. He says he will not run for the Senate seat of Kirsten Gillibrand. Fortunately, Ben Smith of Politico has dialed in via Skype to help us sort all this out. Hi, Ben. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Brian.
Ben, the pressure because of ethics allegations was ramping up for some time on Charlie Rangel, but he resisted them. What was the straw that broke the camel's back?
I think the straw that broke the camel's back was the loss of confidence among Democrats in the House of Representatives, who are getting increasingly nervous about their own re-elections, and for whom there's this image circulating of Rangel kind of snoozing in a lounge chair in the Caribbean that the Republicans are kind of trying to use to define this kind of corrupt, sclerotic Democratic majority. And it became clear that a majority of members of the Democratic caucus wanted to reprimand him essentially by taking his gavel away and getting him kind of putting some distance between themselves and Rangel. Putting themselves,
distance between themselves and Rangel, that is, other Democrats and Rangel. Is that because this is expected to be a contentious congressional election year and he's now seen as damaged goods?
Yeah, that's exactly right. He's seen as damaged goods. He's seen as sort of a symbol of Democratic corruption. That's how Republicans are trying to use him. And so the fact that Democrats couldn't do anything to him, amid these really grotesque scandals, which maybe the legality is less important. I mean, the 4 rent-controlled apartments is just sort of like such an obvious. I don't know if abuse of power is the right word, but certainly a perk that comes with power. I mean, one of the great ironies of this is that Rangel unseated Adam Clayton Powell Jr. himself under investigation for, among other things, misusing money to go stay in the Caribbean.
His predecessor 40 years ago. By the way, as we speak, is David Patterson still the governor?
Last I checked on Twitter, like 30 seconds ago, he still was, but I mean, it is looking really bad. I mean, what's so stunning about all this all like happened today. This is just one day in New York. This is a year or 2 years worth of political scandal. It's kind of makes your head spin. But yes, a whole other front opened up on David Patterson with the state commission ruling that or basically finding that he had, gotten some free Yankee tickets, which you're not supposed to do, and then lied about it under oath, which is worse.
Really lied about it under oath? What was the context of that?
I think it was in the course of, I would not take an oath to it being under oath, but it was in the course of their inquiry. He allegedly lied to their investigators about whether he had reimbursed for the tickets.
And backdated a check, they found?
The check. I mean, this stuff is so nickel and dime, right?
He said he had intended to reimburse, and I guess they didn't take that at face value. What's so weird about this, Ben, is that for all there has been pressure on David Patterson based on rumors of things having nothing to do with these 2 stories that really have surfaced about him. There were rumors that he would resign based on the rumors. Now there are these things coming out for which he might really have to resign, but they weren't the reasons that everybody was saying he was going to resign 2 weeks ago.
And in fact, he seems to have panicked in response to all these crazy swirling rumors and engaged, or whether or not this is why, and engaged in this, what looks like a really kind of grotesque and potentially illegal cover-up of an AIDS domestic violence, alleged domestic violence. But that alleged cover-up came, as these rumors were swirling and the second floor in Albany was panicking. So it seems as though some of the things he did were really within the last few weeks amid this storm of kind of half-truths.
So we really don't know, to be fair to the governor, right? He presumably knew this woman for years because she was the girlfriend for 4 years of his closest aide. He had a relationship that involved helping her get access to good doctors for her cancer treatment. So when he called her up, it's not like he just called an accuser he didn't know out of the blue.
No, that's true. I mean, to me, the more damning one is that he is one of his aides saying he had asked her to speak to the woman and to make this go away.
If true, as reported in the press. Last thing, the U.S. Senate race in New York State. It looked like we were going to have this really high-profile election season with Harold Ford challenging Senator Gillibrand in a Democratic primary, and then maybe the Daily News owner and real estate mogul Mort Zuckerman running as a Republican or sort of a Bloomberg-style Republican independent. Now Ford and Zuckerman in the last few days both say, never mind. Were they scared off by something?
This is a bitter disappointment to political reporters like me. I mean, Ford, I think, there were first of all, he just didn't live up to his billing. He kind of went from stumble to stumble. He found that people in New York were serious about not liking his positions on gay rights and abortion rights and not buying his very recent transformations, and that the sort of cocktail party interest didn't really seem to extend beyond cocktail parties. The Zuckerman sort of more, and the other thing that scared Ford off was this impending Mort Zuckerman run, and people taking that, people in his circle who could have given him money, taking that a lot more seriously. Just as that started getting serious, and I did a big story, I guess it was yesterday morning, that this all seems like weeks, stretched out over weeks at this point.
It's been that kind of a week. About
the possibility of his running, including some stuff that how he'd probably have to answer questions about his personal life and things like this. And he, I think partly because he didn't particularly like having his privacy, compromising his privacy, also because he is very engaged in running his business. His business partner just died. And he has 2 young kids, very straightforward reasons, I think, decided not to.
Ben Smith, read him on Politico.com. Ben, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
It's Brian Lehrer Live, and what's in store for the remainder of this hour? Well, among other things, we'll learn the importance of the 2010 census to New Yorkers.
What we know is that historically there has been what's called a differential undercount, meaning that certain groups have been not counted in prior census, and those groups are people of color.
We will explore the census, also the Whitney Museum. It's the season of the Biennial Art Show, and we'll get a sneak peek at some video art. But right now, let's think about an important public policy question involving soda and the like. Let's grapple with Snapple. As New York's coffers empty and the diabetes rate soars, the governor would like to raise money and improve our health by taxing sugary drinks. Here's an argument in favor of the tax from the State Health Commissioner, Dr. Richard Daines.
Sure, too much junk food and too little exercise also play roles in the obesity epidemic. But nutritionists and pediatricians tell us that increased intake of sugar-sweetened beverages is the single most important cause of obesity in children. In 2008, an article in the Journal of the American Dietetic Association reviewed all of the scientific information about diet and obesity in children. They said, and I quote, "Only one high-risk dietary practice emerged as being linked to overweight in children, the intake of sweetened beverages." Obesity is a problem we all have a stake in solving. Not only does obesity directly affect the health and happiness of many children and adults, the New York State Comptroller calculates that obesity causes $6.1 billion a year in extra health care costs, and that's a bill we all have to pay. For all these reasons, and especially in these tough times, Governor Patterson has asked us to do something effective about the obesity crisis. Of course, if we keep drinking the same amount of soda, we'll just pay the government 18% more and we won't improve our health. But I think New Yorkers are smarter than that. I think we can reduce our consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages.
But would a soda tax actually decrease our sugar intake? What's the relationship between taxation and health behaviors? Joining us is Marion Nestle, professor in the Department of Nutrition, Food Science, and Public Health at NYU, and author of the books What to Eat and Food Politics. And via Skype from Los Angeles, Jonah Lehrer, no relation, author of How We Decide. He writes about neuroscience and behavior. You might have read his Times Magazine piece just this weekend about the upside of depression. Welcome to both of you. Thank you very much.
Glad to be here.
Marion, what do we know about how taxes influence health behavior? Is there good data, research on this?
Well, there's data for cigarettes. One of the things, everybody knew that cigarettes were bad for them, but it was very difficult for people to stop. And as soon as the taxes started coming in and went up and up and up and up, people stopped smoking, particularly young people. And that, it seemed to me, was a particularly useful part of the tax strategy because cigarette companies target young people. And so this deliberately intervened with exactly the target group that you want to intervene with.
And what about taxes specifically to reduce obesity? Has this been tried anywhere in the country?
Not that I know of. There certainly are taxes on junk foods, but those taxes are there to raise revenue for the state, and they haven't been tied to obesity in a very clear way, in the way that this particular soda tax has been linked to it. Obesity is being used as the reason for introducing this tax, when it's perfectly clear what this is really about, is about raising revenue for the state.
Well, not according to Dr. Daines. He's the health commissioner, not the revenue director. But maybe the tax is set too low.
Well, that's what I think.
$1 a pack on cigarettes. It would be, what, a few dimes on a can of soda.
Oh, and maybe not even that much, and it's not clear what the level is going to be. So it's very difficult to believe that that's going to be a large enough sum of money to make a difference, although there have been, economists have looked at it and have looked at the elasticity of soda taxes, and they think this will make a difference. I think it's an interesting experiment, and I'd like to see it tried.
Well, we may see it tried. Jonah, you wrote that the impetus to write your book about neuroscience and decision-making came from how long it took you to decide between apple cinnamon and honey nut Cheerios. And in the book, you look at a variety of research on how people decide what to buy. One thing you talk about is the fact that people tend to think that things cost more and are therefore better. Things that cost more are better. Do you think the research should be an argument against things like the soda tax? That is, if soda costs more, might actually people value it more and buy more of it?
Oh, I'm not sure they'd buy more of it. I think the data we have from cigarette tax is actually pretty impressive, that every 10% increase in a cigarette tax costs a 4% decrease in demand. That said, I think they may enjoy Coke more if Coke is more expensive. There's lots of data to show that people, for instance, can't tell the difference between Coke and generic cola, the generic brand in the supermarket, and yet they're convinced that Coke tastes much better, in large part because it's, got this marketing machine behind it and because it costs twice as much. So if we do increase the price of soda, I don't think people would buy more soda. I think they would simply savor their Coca-Cola a little bit more.
Interesting. And you come fairly close to this in your book with what you call big gulp syndrome. What is that? Not that we have many 7-Elevens in New York City for our viewers to know what that means, but big gulp is the big drink at 7-Eleven, the big fountain soda. What do you mean by big gulp syndrome?
This is part of a larger flaw in the brain called mental accounting, which is that, the brain is overwhelmed by all sorts of stuff going on in the real world. So it's often very difficult for us to keep track of just how many French fries we're putting in our mouth. And so there's a very clever experiment done in a New York City lobby of an apartment house where these behavioral economists put out a big bowl of M&Ms, and they simply change the size of the scoop from day to day. And what they found is by simply altering the size of the scoop, they can get people to eat 3 times as many M&Ms. These people had no idea they were eating more M&Ms. They simply, when the scoop got bigger, they ate more candy. And the larger point is, it's because they weren't counting how many M&Ms they're putting in their mouth. They're simply counting, oh, I just took one scoop of candy. That's all I ate. In the same way, we don't count how many French fries we eat at McDonald's. We simply say, I just had the order of French fries at McDonald's with my hamburger.
So, Marion, have policymakers ever tried to give us incentives to reduce portion size in order to reduce obesity?
No, and I think we need that more than anything, because if I had one thing that as a nutrition educator I could teach people, it's that larger portions have more calories. It's not intuitively obvious at all. People really can't do the multiplication. A double gulp is 64 ounces. It's got 800 calories in it.
Jonah, you wrote about some interesting research in an article in Wired magazine. It looked at how social networks influenced health behaviors. Tell us about that.
This is work done by Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler, sociologists and political scientists, and they use data from the Framingham Heart Study. It's a massive longitudinal study that tracked heart disease, but they also noticed that the Framingham Heart Study contained lots of social network data. People listed their friends along with all this medical information over decades. And so they decided to use all this data to track the spread of obesity. What they found is that looking at Framingham, Massachusetts, you can go back 30 years and there was no obesity. It was a very, very rare thing. Now 40% of the town is obese. And so they generated all these beautiful maps tracking the spread of obesity within social networks over time. And what they found is that depending on your social network, that played a large role, a shockingly large role in determining the likelihood of a person becoming obese. So in here, I think, is the most astonishing statistic. If a close friend of yours becomes obese, the chances that you will become obese increase by 171%.
And the other way around, if people were giving up smoking, say, in your social circle, then you were more likely to give up smoking too?
Absolutely. That makes perfectly intuitive sense to me. You know, it's much harder to quit if your friends are still lighting up in the bar. If you're surrounded by all these alluring triggers, it's much harder to, get over nicotine.
So how do you turn that into policy at the local level?
At the local level, you make portion sizes smaller, and the New York City Health Department, which is looking at all these different ways to try to make it easier for people to make healthier choices. They've gotten rid of trans fat and they've got calorie labeling. I think it's time for them to take on portion size.
How do they take on portion size at the policy level? You're not going to outlaw supersizing, are you?
No, but you could ask companies to charge more for larger portions. As it is, the larger portions cost proportionally less on a volume or weight basis, and they certainly could change some pricing strategies that might have a very big effect.
Jonah, for people who may have read your New York Times Magazine piece this week or have it sitting around on their coffee tables meaning to read it, is there a relationship between the health behaviors that we're talking about and depression, as you wrote about it, and the upside of depression?
Oh gosh, that's an interesting question. I mean, not directly. I think one of the symptoms of depression, of course, is the lack of ability, the lack of interest in taking pleasure from all the things we normally take pleasure in, be it sex or food. These scientists argue that that's actually a way of focusing the brain on the major life problem, the acute stressor you have to solve. But I certainly won't advocate major depressive disorder as a weight loss tool.
As a way to stop enjoying eating large portions. But related to the Framingham study, depression also spread in communities, or happiness, correct?
Yeah, the idea is that all these emotions are very social. So things like loneliness, things like happiness, these also spread from person to person. They also spread amid our social network. These scientists, Christakis and Fowler, have also studied how Facebook is changing people's social networks. And I think one of their very interesting findings looked at how people who have 1,000 friends on Facebook, they don't actually have more friends in real life. They still have, just like the rest of us, somewhere between 4 to 7 close personal friends. So there's an idea that humans, we're pretty stubborn. The human mind is a pretty stubborn machine. So even if we've got, 1 million friends on Twitter, 1 million followers, whatever, we're still probably just have 4 to 7 people we're actually going to talk
Friendship
talk
can
seriously
be
about our
virtual.
major life issues with.
Friendship can be virtual. It's too bad food can't be virtual.
That's right.
It would solve a lot of problems.
But you're for the governor's proposed sugary drinks tax, even though you don't think it's high enough?
I think it's a really interesting experiment, and certainly there are plenty of people who think it's going to work. I'll vote with them for a while. I'd like to see it tried.
Well,
as an experiment, if we have a governor.
That's right. Maybe if the governor leaves office, more obesity, or maybe Dick Ravitch would then pick it up. We will see. Thank you both very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Coming up, videos at the Whitney Biennial and the 2010 census, critical to New York. We'll look at some great census maps. But first, here are this week's online video picks. Number one, if you thought the Republicans played rough with President Obama at the healthcare summit, check out the European Parliament. Here's an excerpt now being viewed around the world on YouTube of Nigel Farage, president of the UK Independence Party, as he addresses the European Council president, Herman Van Rompuy. Brace yourself.
You have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And the question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask is, who are you? I'd never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you. I would like to ask you, President, who voted for you? And what mechanism? Oh, I know democracy is not popular with you lot. And what mechanism do the peoples of Europe have to remove you? Is this European democracy? Well, I sense, though, that you're competent and capable and dangerous, and I have no doubt that it's your intention to be the quiet assassin of European democracy and of the European nation states. You appear to have a loathing for the very concept of the existence of nation states. Perhaps that's because you come from Belgium, which of course is pretty much a non-country. But since you took over, we've seen Greece reduced to nothing more than a protectorate. Sir, you have no legitimacy in this job at all, and I can say with confidence that I can speak on behalf of the majority of the British people in saying we don't know you, we don't want you, and the sooner you're put out to grass, the better.
But what do you really think? Are you awake now? The political context for that, according to the Guardian newspaper, is Nigel Farage's run for Parliament in a conservative area where he thinks his behavior and insults will be popular. Tame by comparison is Congressman Anthony Weiner of Brooklyn and Queens and his little outburst on the House floor the other day. Watch for the different result.
Anthony, go for it. You, Weiner. Yep.
You know, you gotta love these Republicans. I mean, you guys have chutzpah. The Republican Party is a wholly owned subsidiary of an insurance industry. That's the fact. They say that, well, this isn't going to do enough, but when we propose an alternative to provide competition, they're against it. They say that, well, we want to strengthen state insurance commissioners and they'll do the job. But when we did that in our national health care bill, they said, we're against it. They said they want to have competition, and when we proposed requiring competition, the Republicans are against it. They are a wholly owned subsidiary of the insurance industry. That's the fact. And now they stand up and say that...
Mr. Speaker, I ask the gentleman's words be taken down.
Oh. You really don't want to go here, Mr. Lundgren.
The gentleman will suspend. Gentleman from New York will please take a seat. The clerk will report the words.
Which means the words were stricken. That's right. If you insult the president of the European Council personally and insult all of Belgium in the bargain as a non-country, and the world beats a path to your door. But accuse the Republican Party of being a shill for the insurance industry, and your words are stricken from the record as if they never happened. Then there is the quiet riot staged by Republican Senator Jim Bunning of Kentucky. The former Major League Baseball pitcher used the Senate rules to single-handedly deny an extension of unemployment benefits and federal highway funds for a few days.
I don't think it's fair to do what you are proposing to do, Senator from Illinois. And I'll be here as long as you're here and as long as all those other senators are here. And I'm going to object every time.
Senator, is there objection?
I object.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, I wanted to give the senator from Kentucky an opportunity to explain his position on this, and I didn't assert regular order until he'd had an opportunity to do it, but I would like to remind him that on November the 4th of last year, you issued a press release entitled Bunning Supports Extension of Benefits for Kentucky's Unemployed. Legislation includes Bunning Net Operating Losses Amendment. It passed by a vote of 98-0, and you said Kentucky's been hit hard by the current economic downturn. This legislation will lend a helping hand to working families across the Commonwealth who are in search of a job. It wasn't paid for either.
Senator from Kentucky objects?
Yes.
Okay. Senator objects.
Mr. President.
The senator from Illinois.
I thought maybe we'd gotten through to the senator from Kentucky. It's interesting, he wants to talk about everything except the unemployed people who are affected by his objection.
The Senate yesterday finally worked around Bunning's one-man filibuster, as even his own Republican Party didn't want to be associated with it. The dirty little secret both parties are avoiding, though, Bunning had a point. He wanted the unemployment benefits extended, yes. He just wanted Congress to pay for them with other cuts rather than borrow for them, a pay-as-you-go strategy that the Democrats and Republicans in Congress both say they embrace. By the way, did you know that Jim Bunning once threw a perfect game against the Mets? Father's Day, 1964. Video pick number 4. The opponents of more government involvement in health care are reaching for all kinds of devices for defeating the Democrats' reforms. Censoring Anthony Weiner is one. Another is to equate medical care for humans to medical care for pets, as in this video excerpt from the Libertarian Reason magazine. It begins with a TV news report about a hospital.
United Regional Medical Center has the green light from the state to build a brand new hospital, but there's a lawsuit to stop it.
Guess who's been trying to stop a new hospital from opening in Manchester, Tennessee? 2 existing hospitals.
They fought every step of the plan for almost 2 years.
Now frustrated residents are protesting.
New hospital now!
This 90-year-old lady has begun a petition drive for a new hospital.
People resorting to petitions and protests just because existing hospitals are afraid of a little competition? There are no special laws that let Starbucks prevent other coffee shops from opening, or that allow one restaurant to keep other restaurants away.
I would be very upset if we took some of that entrepreneurial spirit out of the veterinary profession.
Dr. Weinstein is glad vets don't have to deal with regulations like con laws.
It's great that veterinarians can be entrepreneurs. It allows veterinarians to be small business people. It allows veterinarians to focus on service and care.
These are the people who decide how many animal hospitals there should be.
In veterinary medicine, we could have 2 practices right next to one another, and then it's the consumer deciding to whom they want to go.
If that way it's good enough for these guys, maybe it's good enough for us too.
Maybe. And video pick number 5. Look how people built an online map to help aid agencies get emergency relief to earthquake victims in Haiti. Let's take a look at this. The main roads are green, the side roads are red, and the refugee camps are the glowing areas in blue, as you will see. It shows the power of the crowd to help by using a tool called OpenStreetMap. This helps aid workers unfamiliar with the country to get around and arrive at where they're needed. Let's watch. And those are this week's online video picks. This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Here in New York, the Whitney Biennial is underway. That's the show that gathers under one roof scores of works from new and lesser-known artists from around the world. This year, the New York Times Review said it's the video art that makes the show tick. Whitney curators Francesco Bonami and Gary Carrion Moriari will tantalize us with some video clips. Hello, welcome to the program. Thank you very much. Let's just dive right into a video clip first. I think we're going to let this one speak for itself. Kate Gilman.
Absolutely.
Kate Gilmore, yeah.
Kate Gilmore.
Do you want us to introduce it a little bit?
You want to say anything about this, or but because I don't want to, you know, we have the beginning of it.
This was the first piece that we installed in the museum, and it had a specially built element, and it was good to start off the show with a bang. So.
We can say only this, that after we went to see her in the studio, she showed us some of her video, and there was no way we could not invite her. We were very scared about it.
Let's check out what was so scary. then this goes on for what, about 2.5 minutes?
Yeah, something
And
like
she
that.
finally kicks her way all the way out?
Yeah, it's she break in and then climb up the structure and comes out alive.
And for people scratching their heads at home right now saying, and that's good art because...
Well, you know, I think it's engaged with the history of video art going back to the 70s where artists were doing, you know, challenging their bodies in different ways. And so Kate always kind of sets up these sort of physical challenges for themselves, and sometimes she succeeds and sometimes she doesn't. But she's also engaging with issues about women's identity and what's appropriate art for, you know, for a woman to be making. And you know, she always does pieces with kind of exuberant color, and I think there's a lot of fun and irreverence there too. So.
All right, so if that one was a video of somebody kicking her way out, here's one of somebody painting his way in. So he painted the tires. Notice that the scenery will not change as the car drives along. Okay. So, car and driver. He painted the tires. He took the scenery along with him.
But this is like, you know, a lot of artists are referring to Oliver Hardy, Buster Keaton. They're looking at this kind of early kind of slapstick videos, and they are creating their own video. And he's creating a sculpture. The sculpture is a kind of failing sculpture because all the car is falling apart. Everything is falling apart. It's kind of amusing, and people look. So art today also engage people on a humorous level. It's not only always high level, and is always trying to the feeling like Kate Gilmore, you know, she's a friend of mine, saw the video and she told me, you know, I feel like that sometimes. So art is also this, you know, communicating something that people feels every day and put it on a different dimension.
And he didn't seem to have an accelerator problem as far
he
as we know.
he didn't have anything.
Gary, there are millions of videos on YouTube these days by people who are being creative. What makes something Whitney material?
I think there has to be some engagement with the history of art and the history of video. I mean, I think there is kind of a strain of young video artists who are working with YouTube and often post their videos on YouTube. And we've shown some of those videos at the Whitney before. I think what we were highlighting today and what video artists are making right now is getting a little bit away from narrative content, a little bit away from some of the kind of more sort of superficial things that happen on YouTube, and looking at artists who are looking back to a very particular moment in the history of film and video where the body was central, and I think it's an appropriate style for this moment in American art.
And the next video excerpt we're going to see is from a piece by Babette Mangold. Do you want to set this up at all?
Well, that's an historical artist, one of the senior artists in the exhibition. She presented this video of people building a wall of photograph, and the title is How We Look at things, buildings, people that we know, famous people, performance. And this kind of process of going on and down, and so this kind of endless way we deal with images.
How we look. And Francesco, you can describe what we're seeing here.
Well, this was a film that she did when she did the installation many years ago at the PS1, actually, in New York, and she recreated the same installation for the Whitney. They are building up this wall of images that Babette Mangold took herself, and once the entire wall is put up, is this kind of big mosaic, almost a window made of different images, and you know, you are forced to look, you know, and the point of Babette is that, you know, sometimes we take everything for granted, but if you look carefully, you can see buildings and details and people expression. That she has also photograph of her family, of her nephews, grandchildren, and so on. So we look at reality in different ways, you know, personal, public, and she talk about that.
And at some point she actually tears up some of those photographs, right?
Yeah, yeah. So it's about the creation of the image and also the destruction of the image. So.
When I grew up, I was taught the values of art through abstract expressionism. It was about color, it was about shape, it was about light. Then at some point, art, including at the Whitney Biennial, became largely about deconstructing society and injustice. Where are we today?
Well, today we are in a more intimate thing. I think the artists went back to intimate and making things with hands. They want to kind of reflect on their power to change their world and hands to change a little bigger world, and eventually to change a little bigger world. It's like a Russian doll, you know, or like a stone in the water that make different rings, you know. So they are not heroic. They don't want to make big gesture, you know. They don't want to be, you know, they want to do something. They don't want to be Schnabel. They want to do people that do something, and they try to change the world through the little things.
And I think they do that in all these different media. So we'll have, you know, we have, in addition to a lot of film and video in the show, there's also a lot of painting in the show, very traditional abstract painting and drawing. And there's also, you know, work that engages with different political issues, but also on a very personal kind of community-based level as well.
Let's look at another video excerpt. This one is by Rashad Newsom. Gary, Minimalism Lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is kind of a related piece to what Rashad has in the show. The piece in the show actually is two voguing dancers, that kind of sort of expressionistic style of movement that grew up in sort of in gay nightclubs in the Bronx in the early 80s. But he's looking at this kind of signifiers of African American culture and looking at them in a very formal way. So he's choreographing them in the same way you would choreograph sort of a minimal music composition or even a minimal drawing. That's what he's doing with the dance piece as well. So,
what's the place of video within the Whitney Biennial overall? What's the context of what we're seeing tonight?
Well, what we try to do is we put video mostly on one floor, the third floor. We want to, before, you know, you have video in the mix of painting, sculpture, and people have to look at the watch and decide if they want to see a painting or they want to go inside the dark room and see a 25 minutes video. So most of the people choose painting over it. So we try to put it like almost a theater. You cross the threshold, you enter another state of mind, and maybe, you know, you can, it should be easier to absorb.
It takes it more seriously in a way,
yeah,
because instead of something that breaks up the still art, it's its own genre in a way.
Yeah,
right?
we don't want to, it's not fair toward the painting, it's not fair toward the video, we think. And we think that, and paradoxically, the video that we have in the show, they are video that you can, have you seen some example, you can go in for 1 second and get the picture in a way, understand what it is.
We have one or two more, we'll see how much time we have. This is a video by Kelly Nipper.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
So it is dance, to be sure, and be the tour guide for us and interpret the meaning of the counting and the mask.
Okay, so this is a good example of a video that it lasts 5 minutes, but in theory you can look it for 10 seconds. Once you see the first 10 seconds, you get the video. Is a dance.
I won't tell her you said that.
You can tell her. You know? We want to make life easy for people. We don't want to make life difficult when they do a show. And Kelly Nipper took a dance from early 20th century. She restaged it, and this dance is called the witch, and they are kind of weather pattern in the movement of the dancer. There is a lot of, you know, Mercer Cunningham was very influential on the younger artists. All this, the body is very important. But again, you can see that this video is almost a painting. You can look at it as a still. You don't really spend the entire week.
Let's get one more excerpt in here. The videographer, the artist, is Carrie Tribe.
If you did, how would you get back?
One of the clues that we had from other instances of brain insult was that after the onset of the memory impairment, people sometimes had impaired memory for the years before the insult to their brain. That's called a retrograde amnesia. We wanted to examine HM's remote memory to see whether he had a retrograde amnesia.
Professor Suzanne Corkin and her colleagues at MIT designed a test called Famous Faces to assess the cutoff point for HM's memory. HM did a superb job recognizing people from the years preceding his operation. In contrast, his knowledge for famous faces after 1953 was, for all...
And, of course, that continues. Is it art or is it a science documentary?
Well, I think what you're not getting with this piece just in the video clip is it's actually a 2 16mm film projections. And what Carrie Tribe did was she interviewed this medical patient, HM, who after... he was kind of a very famous medical case from the 50s where he had an experimental surgery for epilepsy, and the result was his short-term memory was only 20 seconds. So Carrie did lots of interviews with him and then sort of restages this in this kind of experimental documentary form. But the interesting thing about the piece is that the same film runs through both 16mm film projections on a 20-second delay. So what you see on the left, you see again 20 seconds later on the right.
All right. We've got to go. Thank you very much for coming in and screening some of the excerpts. The video art, well reviewed at the Whitney Biennial. The Whitney Biennial is up until when?
May 31st.
All right. That's how long you have to go and see it. Thank you both very much.
Thank you very much.
Coming up next, the census, why New Yorkers are so hard to count and why it matters a lot. This is Brian Lehrer Live.
Did you know CUNY leads the way for students with disabilities?
CUNY leads to my career as a healthcare professional.
CUNY leads to my career as an accountant.
CUNY leads to my career as a music teacher.
CUNY leads means linking employment, academics, and disability services. If you're a CUNY student with a visible or invisible disability, the City University of New York offers eligible students free career development and placement services.
Gain access to exciting employment opportunities through the power of a CUNY education.
As an employer, CUNY Leads provides me with a more qualified, diverse workforce.
Each campus has its own Leads counselor, a go-to person who knows you
and helps you enjoy every aspect of college life.
For more information and to find out if you qualify, visit cuny.edu/CUNY Leads. CUNY Leads to the career I always wanted.
One must be careful. Well, that's a nice picture.
Come on, Anna.
Okay.
Foreclosure doesn't affect just you. It affects your whole family, too. If you've fallen behind on your mortgage, we can help. Call 1-888-995-HOPE, because nothing is worse than doing nothing.
This is Brian Lehrer Live, where web video meets the issues. Sometime in the next couple of weeks, you will be getting a census form in the mail. The tally of the U.S. population that happens every 10 years is underway. Please fill out and return your form. An accurate head count is essential to New York. Among other things, census numbers determine the number of congressional districts, the number of congressmen and congresswomen that we get for our area, and the distribution of billions of dollars in federal aid. And New York City has traditionally been a headache for the census with its incredibly diverse, ever-changing population. There are many people working to help make sure that all New Yorkers get counted, and one of them is my next guest. Stephen Romalewski is the director of the City University of New York's Mapping Service. CUNY has created the Census 2010 Hard to Count interactive map. It's designed to help census takers determine where they are likely to have a tough time counting everybody, and it will help them, we hope, to get an accurate count in those areas. Stephen, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you. Glad to be
And for
here.
creating these maps. So we're going to plunge right in and take a tour of your Census 21 Hard to Count interactive map. Let's go to the first screen. And with this, you can tell us what we're looking at and give us an overview of what the map is and why you made it.
Sure. What we did is we developed a system that would help all of the different organizations, community groups, national civil rights groups, local governments, who were trying to boost participation in the 2010 census. And this year, the census did something, the Census Bureau, to help that. They did an analysis of the hard-to-count population nationwide at the local level, the county level, and the statewide level. We took that information and we developed an interactive mapping website so anyone can zoom into their metropolitan region, their county, their neighborhood, find out who's hard to count and where.
And we're going to zip around some of these maps. This one, tell us about the color coding.
So the darker red areas mean that a greater proportion of each county's population is
And these are our
hard to count.
This is by county, right?
That's
by
right.
the boroughs and other counties in our region.
That's right. So you can see that the Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Bronx have 50% or more of their population that's hard to count.
That's the red?
That's right. And then the orange is a little less percentage, and then the yellow area is a smaller percentage. And
go ahead.
So it gives organizations who are, let's say, planning a media buy of advertising to figure out, well, should they focus more in the Manhattan and Bronx area? Should they worry about Nassau County so much? What about northern New Jersey? And so it gives them a broad brush view of
And as we go, we'll talk about what makes an area hard to count. But let's zero in on Brooklyn. Tell us what the color coding means on the neighborhood level. As we go to a Brooklyn map, let's see if we can get this up real quick. We're going to zoom in on Brooklyn here.
They should hit the clear button to get rid of that.
Okay.
Underneath the navigation bar.
Instructions to navigate on the fly. In the meantime, you could tell us a little bit about when we say hard to count, what are we actually measuring? How are people hard to count?
What the Census Bureau did is they looked at 12 population and housing characteristics of each neighborhood in the country. And they thought that those characteristics were the most closely associated with low participation in the 2000 census. And so they looked at data from the 2000 census for all of these characteristics, and they came up with a hard-to-count score, anywhere from 0 to 130 for each census tract in the country.
0 to 130, that's quite a large scale.
Yes, it is. And so what we did is we looked at the tracts that had a score of 61 or more. And that's the top 20% of the hardest to count tracts nationwide.
Such as some of these in Brooklyn. There it is.
That's right. So these are census tracts. Each tract has about 2,500 people, some fewer, some much more. But this gives you a sense of, in this case, at the tract level, the dark red areas are the ones that have a score of 76 or more, top 10% of the hardest count tracts nationwide. So it gives you a sense of where groups should focus their efforts if they're going to be doing door-to-door outreach, if they're going to be doing phone banking, if they're going to be putting out materials, and it gives you a sense of where they should focus so they get the biggest bang for their buck.
So North Brooklyn, it looks like, is a particularly problematic area to count.
North Brooklyn, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Bushwick, Prospect Heights out in East New York.
Why?
Down in Sunset Park. Well, what the legend on the left shows, all of those color-coded bars, those are all the characteristics the Census Bureau looked at. So they looked at renter-occupied units, multifamily housing, low-income poverty rates, language isolation, difficulty speaking English. And so what we've done is, as you scroll through each of these categories, you can see why each of these areas is hard to count. Is it because there's a high proportion of people that don't speak English well?
I see. So this color represents a particular way that people in that area are hard to count.
Exactly. It's the percent, let's say, of the number of houses that are, or the number of housing units that are renter-occupied, or the percent of the population that's in poverty, things like that. And so for an organization who's planning an outreach campaign, they need to know that kind of information. It's not just enough to say hard to count in this area. They need to know why. Should they be doing door knocking rather than phone banking? Should they have bilingual materials? So it gives them an edge, gives them a leg up on planning their efforts, their strategies.
Let's go to the next map, and I think what we'll see is that some of the areas with low participation in the 2000 census did not score particularly hard to count by the official map. Is that what we're looking at?
Actually, that shows the color-shaded tracts are, I think, renter-occupied, the proportion of population renter-occupied, and the green hash marks, actually no, just switched. The red hash-marked areas are the communities that had low participation in 2000. So in some ways, there's a good overlap. And for an organization, again, planning their outreach, they can know, all right, it's not only low participation in 2000, but it's probably going to be hard to count this time around. But sometimes there isn't a match, and areas that maybe have a lot of single-family housing and even median income, middle-income areas might have had low participation because of distrust of the census and the like. So adding that information to the maps lets people see both of those types of information so they can do a better strategy.
So are these breakouts actually done by people at the Census Bureau, or are they done by you at the CUNY Mapping Service and provided to Census?
Well, both. We took the data that the Census Bureau developed, and our Center for Urban Research at the Graduate Center analyzes census data all the time at the local and regional and national scales, and we then converted the information into a usable format and an interactive mapping format. And it's all of this is geographically based. You need to know where the characteristics are. So
you don't have to force this on them.
No. And the groups they want the information. They are glad to have it. It's a nationwide application. People all over the country are using it.
And some very important things have happened since 2000 that are likely to influence who's hard to count this year. For example, the foreclosure rate is so much higher. Let's take a look at one last map. This is the one that pertains to foreclosures, right?
That's right. So the green hash-marked areas are neighborhoods where the foreclosure risk is 50% or more. In other words, 50% or more of the mortgages that were given in those areas are in foreclosure starts now.
Wow.
So it's a sense of housing turmoil and housing turnover, and again, the outreach groups that are planning their efforts need to know
So if somebody's recently been kicked out of their home, they have to figure out how to find those people with no known address, perhaps.
Exactly. And the nice thing about that information is that it's more recent than the 2000 vintage data that we have for the other color shading on the map.
We do have one final map. I said that was the last one, but I think we're going to look at your Twitter feed and how it intersects with some of this. What is this?
So we also wanted to add real-time mapped tweets, people posting to Twitter about the census, and so you can see where they're posting their tweets from and what they're saying. And it's not only kind of a neat and cool way of highlighting social networking, but for groups who are trying to reach out to reporters or nonprofits who are commenting on the census, it's a great way for them to find allies and find support.
My guess is people tend to tweet about the census from easy-to-count areas.
Not necessarily. There's a group called Long Island Wins, an immigration organization on Long Island. They're really trying to boost participation in their areas, and so they're tweeting about it too.
Thank you very much. Great stuff.
Thank you.
Finally tonight, remember last month hearing about the coyote sighting in Central Park? Well, shh, someone caught it on video. Now coyotes are New Yorkers too. And that's it for this week's show. We're here live Wednesday nights at 7:30 or anytime online at brianlehrer.tv. And tune into my daily radio show, 10 a.m. on WNYC Radio. Tomorrow morning, why the recession in New York may turn out to be not as serious as predicted. That's 10 a.m. on WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. Have a great night.